Welcome to Healthy Relationships for Youth, Session 5, Stereotypes and Pop Culture. Stereotypes are tough to pinpoint because they exist in almost everything we read, see, or hear. An easy way to figure out if someone is using a stereotype is if they use a single example of one person to describe all other people who share similarities with that person. An example of this could be, Justin loves the show RuPaul's Drag Race, and he's gay, so all gay men must love RuPaul's Drag Race. Another way to identify stereotypes is when someone uses something they've heard and apply it universally. An example of this could be, Molly is a girl, and girls don't care about sports, so she won't care if we don't ask her to be on the softball team. Stereotypes are harmful because they paint everyone with the same brush and can make it difficult for people to establish themselves as individuals. It creates in-groups and out-groups of people, which means that some people are favored and others are disadvantaged. Many people take stereotypes as truth and may have trouble learning something they assumed was real is actually constructed through media and myths. This is important to keep in mind throughout this session, as the grade 9s will be required to reevaluate some things they may have previously considered to be true. The most common forms of stereotyping are gender-based, racial, ethnic, and based on sexual identity. Knowledge about stereotyping is important to healthy relationships because often stereotypes lead to violence in action or language. Racial slurs, racist violence, and profiling by the police are all forms of violence that are directly related to stereotyping. In Canada, stereotypes about Indigenous peoples are common in our communities and were created and used in order to enforce state-run residential schools. Many stereotypes are used to continue to harm and oppress non-white people without questioning who benefits from these stereotypes. For example, if the stereotype says that a group of people don't work as hard, white people can assume that the poverty in certain areas is due to a lack of work ethic rather than the reality that poverty often stems from decades of neglect and oppression. Gender-based stereotypes tend to underestimate girls' intelligence and ability. Gender-based stereotypes assume that girls will take on more labor in relationships, for example, instigating big talks, checking in with partners, or establishing boundaries, without help from male partners if it's a male-female relationship. It may also lead to assumptions that boys are constantly looking for sex, have no emotions outside of happy and angry, and are not as good at caretaking. These stereotypes contribute to violence by creating an unequal view of men and women, which also creates violence against people who identify outside of the gender binary of men and women, people who identify as non-binary or gender fluid, for example. Stereotypes about people of different sexual orientations can also create homophobic violence by labeling them as others. The goal of this session is to examine how stereotypes are created, how they relate to violence, and where we receive our messages from. A critical view of media messaging is essential to creating safer, healthier relationships in all communities. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great session.